How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. It's great to be learning with you. It's great to be doing our part together, standing our post, learning Torah. Thank God we have this opportunity to do it together. Thank you, God. One of the hostages was released today. A lot of people ask me, are you not concerned? Why don't you pray for the innocent Palestinians? I do pray for them. I do. I pray that their leaders who sacrifice them, it's like an idolatrous death cult where they sacrifice their children to this cause. And it is a corrupt cause. And I say that from personal knowledge, from a reporter I know well who interviewed Hamas leadership. This was in 2014, but the pattern has remained the same. And these leaders of their people, who create this cycle where they manipulate people into doing attacks. They promise them glory and money. Then the attack happens. Israel responds. The people who perpetrate the attack and their leaders hide under hospitals, mosques, schools. Israel warns that they're coming. Please remove the civilians. Hamas leaders prevent the people from leaving, tragically. Then many people are killed in the collateral damage as we defend ourselves from these barbaric attacks. And the October 7th attack was just, a scaling up to an unbelievable degree of what had happened before. And then the world is outraged. Why wouldn't be? Their news sources that they trust are telling them that the Jews and Israel are this vile, wicked people that harm innocents. And so money pours in the form of aid. And these leaders, these so-called leaders, that money that comes in, 5% gets to the people, 50% goes into the pockets of the leaders. Arafat was worth close to $1 billion personally when he died. And the remaining money, let's say 45%, goes to fund further terror attacks to renew the cycle. So yes, there's a population that is enslaved to this death cult, and I pray they are freed from that. Please God, free them from that, because that will create a lasting peace, not only for our people, for Israel, but for this population that is enslaved to their leaders, and so they could flourish. So please God, we end this cycle and we have peace in that region, and all of this stops. Okay. I apologize. I seem to be talking about this a lot lately. What can I say? My children are in an unsafe environment on college campus. We are in an unsafe environment in our neighborhood. Israel, I don't need to describe. It's in the news constantly. And I pray for peace. I really, really pray hard 3 times a day for peace and for the safety of all involved. Let's get back to our work. So, our daf today's page 72. I'm confirming, page Ayin Base. Here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 4, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1, which talked about prohibited marriages and the results of prohibited marriages, and how the sages legislated to avoid prohibited marriages, and what happens in the aftermath of such marriages, and what happens in the aftermath generations later of such marriages. We picked this up right near the top of page 72a. Oh, I didn't welcome people. Who's in the house? Nancy, North Carolina. Sharon in New Jersey. Bella in Florida. Leona in Illinois. Paul in the Great Northwest. Shandor in the Bronx. Karen in Northern California. Melissa in Great Neck. Bill in mid-Missouri. Jonathan in Thousand Oaks, Susan in Dallas, Paula in Chicago. Sharon says, my friends in Israel say they feel safer in Israel than they feel for their family and friends in the diaspora. MS, true fact. There are people in Israel praying for their family here in the diaspora. It's unbelievable and true. Also there on the YouTube side, welcome Marjorie and Michelle. All right, let's get to work. So Rav Papa says, just as there is a dispute between Rav and Shmuel as to the northern border of Babylonia. So we were talking the last few days that sort of the sages divided the whole world in terms of this issue of lineage into three regions, right? Eretz Yisrael, the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael, the Jewish community in Bavel, in Babylonia, and the rest of the world. And because Ezra, at the beginning of the Second Temple period, brought sort of all the people of questionable lineage with him when they returned, so the community in Babylonia was understood to have no, families that had allowed mamzers to marry into the family or slaves to marry into the family. So the presumptive state of the people in Bavel was unflawed lineage. And the presumptive state in the rest of the world is flawed lineage. And in Israel, it sort of depends on does a family have a presumptive state or not. Now that they've talked about these three regions, so it's not so simple as to say Bavel, right? I mean, Bavel, the Babylonian Empire, which became the Persian Empire, was a vast empire. In fact, we're talking about the same time period as the Purim story, which opens with Achashverosh celebrating, the sort of anniversary of ascending to the throne over the largest empire the world had ever known. So are we saying that Jews anywhere in that whole Persian Empire have this perfect, this presumptive status of unflawed lineage? No. And so at the end of Saturday night's class, we were talking about what are the boundaries of that region where we can say all the Jewish families within that region have this presumptive status of unflawed lineage. So we continue that where they're sort of debating the borders. I'm not going to spend too much more time doing that. And then something very interesting is going to happen. So Rav Papa says, just as there is a dispute between Rav and Shmuel as to the northern border of Bavel with regard to lineage, so is there a dispute with regard to bills of divorce. An agent bringing a bill of divorce from a country overseas to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, must state that it was written and signed in his presence. That's a particular law for one bringing a get from outside of Israel into Israel. If he brought it from Babylonia, there is no requirement for him to state this because that Babylonian Jewish community has many sages teaching Torah, people learning Torah. In fact, there was a greater freedom to learn and teach Torah in Bavel than there was in Eretz Yisrael under the Roman occupation. And Rav Yosef says this dispute is with regard to lineage. With regard to bills of divorce, everyone agrees that it is considered Babylonia up to the second lake of the bridge that Shmuel mentioned. So Rami Bar Abba said, the province of Chavel Yama is the glory of Bavel, of Babylonia, with regard to lineage. Shunya and Guvia are the glory of Havel Yama. And Ravina said this town of Tzitzora is also like Shunya and Guvia. So presumably people who lived in these towns, everyone knows that they never had any kind of prohibited marriages being assimilated into the families of that town. So this is also taught in a Baraisa. Hanan ben Pinchas says, Chavel Yama is the glory of Babylonia. Shunya and Guvia and Tzitzora are the glory of Chavel Yama. And Rav Papa says, and nowadays, Samaritans have assimilated with them. Recall that who were the Samaritans? This was a people who had entered Israel during the first temple period when Assyria had defeated the northern kingdom. And they were replaced, right? The 10 northern tribes, these became the lost tribes of Israel, were replaced by these Samaritans who were inserted into the Holy Land. And the Samaritans met with a lot of trouble. They were attacked by wild beasts. And they said, oh, well, it must be that only Jews are allowed to live in the land by God. And that's why we're being forcefully attacked by these wild beasts. And so they converted to Judaism, but it was a reluctant conversion. They tended to not accept the written, they accepted only the written Torah, not the oral Torah. And they caused a lot of problems. And so their conversion was not a sincere conversion. And so even though they, were trustworthy about fulfilling some of the commandments, they were definitely not trustworthy about others. And that's why marriages with Samaritans are problematic in this context. So Rav Papa says, nowadays Samaritans have assimilated with those families in those towns that previously were, absolutely unflawed. So the Gemara comments, and that is not so, right? We don't worry about these Samaritans. Rather, one Samaritan requested to marry a woman from them, and they would not give her to him, which led to the rumor that Samaritans had assimilated with them. And the Gemara asks, what is this region called Chavel Yama? And Rav Papa said this is the area near the Euphrates River, adjacent to Bersi. It's funny, I was just reading earlier that there's, I have a moment to say this because today's daf is relatively short, that there's a sort of two ways of looking at the world according to the scholar, I believe his name is Thomas Sowell. I have not read his books. I just heard this one idea, that some people look at the world as a place where human nature can be molded and changed over time if people would just be educated in the right way and given the right kinds of encouragement. Then they would no longer be selfish or greedy or pursuing their own self-interest, and we could create this wonderful, idyllic, altruistic society. And other people feel, well, human nature is human nature, and it doesn't really change over time. And that we have to have laws that constrain the sort of human appetites for power, greed, destruction, etc. Because we can't count on humans bettering themselves to such a degree that we can take the guardrails off society. I would probably subscribe to that latter view. I mean, when you look at, the kinds of disputes that we see spelled out in these pages from 2,000 years ago, they don't seem that different. They don't seem that different. The sages themselves were different. The way that communities submitted, to Torah law, maybe that's different. That there was a nation living under Torah law for some time. It ended. Israel today is not governed by Torah law. That may be the source of some problems. But just in terms of this idea that human nature itself does not seem to change so much over the centuries. And that is why I believe that the curbs, right, that Torah places on people, it's like, our sages have always taught, like, you are a human being. You have a good inclination and you have an evil inclination. It's up to every individual to battle the evil inclination and do good. But that evil inclination is not going to go away. And people who are not engaged in that battle, beware of such people. Okay. Where am I? So the Gemara relates. There was a certain man who said to the sages, I am from a place. So I just mentioned that because this idea that, somebody was willing to write off a whole community as having intermarried with these Samaritans. And the truth comes out. No, there was one incident. It didn't happen. A rumor got spread and people were ready to subscribe to these rumors and write off a whole community. I mean, does that not happen constantly today? The Gemara relates about all kinds of different issues is what I'm saying. Now, the Gemara relates there was a certain man who said to the sages, I am from a place called Shot Mishot. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nepacha stood on his feet and he said, Shot Mishot is located between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. So the Gemara asks, and if it is located between those rivers, what of it? What law is this relevant for? And so Abaye said that Rabbi Chama bar Ukva says that Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says the area between the rivers is like the exile, meaning Pumbedisa, with regard to lineage. So the Gemara inquires, and where is the area between the rivers located for the purpose of this law? So Rabbi Yochanan says, from Ihi Dekira and upward, i.e. northward. And the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say until the crossing at Gizma, but no further? And Abaye said, well, a strip extends from that region past Ihi Dekira. So Rav Ika bar Avin says that Rav Hananel says that Rav says, Chilazon Nihavnad is like the exile with regard to lineage. So Abaye said to them, do not listen to Rav Ika bar Avin about this, as it was a Yevama, right, a widow who fell before him, right, he must have been the brother of the man who died, who fell before him from there for him to perform Yibum, levirate marriage with her. And he said that its lineage was unflawed because he wished to marry her. So he had a bias, right, in examining the law about this case. So they went and asked. So he had a bias and he said that the law is like this, just so that he could marry this Yavama that fell before him. So Rav Ika bar Avin said to him, the one who's being accused of being biased, he said, is that to say that this law is mine, this law that I'm citing? It is Rav Hananel's law. It applies to my situation, but I didn't make it up. And it is not reasonable to say that I was influenced by my own interest in stating this law. So they went and asked Rav Hananel. And he said to them, Rav said as follows, Chilazon nechavnad is like the exile with regard to lineage, meaning that you don't trust those areas. Right? Is that what he said? Abaye said, do not listen to Rav Ika bar Avin. Oh, okay, let's go on. So the Gemara comments, and this disagrees with the statement of Rabbi Abba bar Kahana. As Rabbi Abba bar Kahana says, what is the meaning of that which is written with regard to the exile of the 10 tribes of the kingdom of Israel, right? That's what I mentioned before. So we read in 2 Kings chapter 18:11, and he put them in Hala and in Habor and on the river of Gozan and in the cities of Medes. Hala is Chilazon, Habor is Hadyav, and the river of Gozan, this is Ginzak. The cities of the Medes are Hamadan and its neighboring towns, and some say this is Nehavnad and its neighboring towns. Since the 10 tribes assimilated with the Gentiles, the lineage of Jews from those places is flawed, unlike that which was taught before. So the Gemara asks, what are the neighboring towns of Nehavnad? And Shmuel said the city of Mushakai, Chosekai, and Rumekai. So Rabbi Yochanan says, and all of these are the same with regard to flawed lineage. It was assumed that Mushakai is the same as Mushkanai. And the Gemara therefore asks, but doesn't Rabbi Chia bar Avin say that Shmuel says Mushakanai is like the exile with regard to lineage? Rather, it must be that Mushakai is discrete and Mushakanai is discrete. These are different places. Now, in connection to the aforementioned places, the Gemara analyzes the following verse describing a vision of a bear-like animal. This is quoting Daniel, book of Daniel 7:5. And it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. So Rabbi Yochanan says this is Chilazon, Hadyav, and Netzivin, which the Persian government sometimes swallows and sometimes discharges. What does that mean? In other words, control over these places passed from the Persians to the Romans and back again several times. Border towns that were passed between these two empires, back and forth. So the first part of that verse stated, and behold, a second beast similar to a bear. Now Rav Yosef taught these are Persians who eat and drink copious amounts, like a bear. and they're corpulent like a bear, and they grow hair like a bear, and have no rest like a bear, which is constantly on the move from one place to another. When Rabbi Ami saw a Persian riding by, he would say, this is a bear on the move. Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, said to Levi, show me Persians, i.e. describe a typical Persian to me. So Levi said to him, they are similar to the legions of the house of David. Rebbe said, show me Chabarim. These are Persian priests. So Levi said to him, they are similar to angels of destruction. Rebbe said, show me Ishmaelites. Levi said to him, they are similar to demons of an outhouse. And Rebbe said, show me Torah scholars of Babylonia. And Levi said to him, they are similar to ministering angels. Now, interesting about this very disparaging view of the Ishmaelites in this conversation between Rebbe and Levi, about this Rav Steinsaltz's comments. There were different Arab tribes, right? The Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael. Different Arab tribes populated the Syrian desert near Babylonia over the centuries. Some groups settled there long before the Muslim conquest, right, which came out of the Saudi Peninsula. And those are Arab tribes also, but there are many different Arab tribes. They are as diverse as other kinds of people are diverse. So about these tribes that were in the Syrian desert near Babylonia before the Muslim conquest, the Talmud describes these people as nomads who lacked any culture and who survived through a combination of commerce and banditry. So that's who's being described here. Now, when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was dying, he said prophetically, there is a place called Homania in Babylonia, and all its people are the sons of Ammon. So in other words, Rebbe, who was the leader of the Jewish community, the Nasi, had kept his mouth shut during his lifetime for fear of offending certain people, even though he had some strong views about certain areas and certain families that had very flawed lineage and should not, sages certainly should not marry those families. And so now he's on his deathbed and he's just going to reveal those areas. So there is a place called Masgaria in Babylonia, and all of its people are mamzers. And there's a place called Bereka in Babylonia, and there are two brothers there who exchange wives with each other. Super licentious, adulterous behavior. And their children are therefore mamzers. There's a place called Bereta de Satya in Babylonia. Today, they turned away from the omnipresent. What did they do? A ditch was a ditch with fish overflowed, and they went and trapped the fish on Shabbos. Rabbi Achai, the son of Rabbi Yoshia, excommunicated them, and they all became apostates. There's a place called Akra de Agma in Babylonia, and there's a man named Ada bar Ahava there. And today, he is sitting in the lap of Abraham, our forefather, since he has been circumcised. And he added, presumably a convert, and he added, today, Rav Yehuda was born in Bavel. Now we're on 72b. Interesting. So Rebbe is dying, and he says that today Rav Yehuda was born in Babylonia. How could a baby that was just born, how does he know the name? How could he say that this is going to be the great Rav Yehuda? It's like he's given a sort of level of prophecy on his deathbed. So the Gemara comments, and the master said, while Rabbi Akiva was dying, Rebbe himself was born. And while Rebbe was dying, Rav Yehuda was born. While Rav Yehuda was dying, Rava was born. While Rava was dying, Rav Ashi was born. And this teaches you that a righteous person does not leave the world before an equally righteous person is created. As it is stated, Ecclesiastes 1:5, and the sun rises and the sun sets. And the same applies to earlier generations. Before Eli's son had gone out, Shmuel, the Ramathite, right, meaning the prophet Shmuel, was already rising, as it is stated, and the lamp of God was not yet gone out, and Shmuel, was lying in the temple of the Lord, which teaches that Samuel was already prophesying in the days of Eli. Now, the Gemara stated above that Homania is an Ammonite city. The verse states the Lord has commanded concerning Jacob that they that are round about him should be his adversaries. Lamentations 1:17, indicating that the Jewish people are surrounded by enemies even in our exile. Amazing, we're reading that right now. Rav Yehuda says Homania is close to Pumnahara, which had Jewish residents. So the verse states, Ezekiel 11:13, and it came to pass when I prophesied that Palatia, I'll just pronounce it the way it's written here in English. In Hebrew, this would be a little bit different. Palatihu, where was it? The print is so small here, I can't find things on the run. That's why I'm always just reading to you in English. But I wanted to get that name. Palatyahu, right? Palatyahu. But for now, I'll just pronounce it the way it's written here in English. Palatia. So Ezekiel says, and it came to pass when I prophesied that Palatia the son of Benaiah died. And then I fell down upon my face and cried with a loud voice and said, Lord God. So Rav and Shmuel disagreed with regard to the meaning of this verse. One said it should be interpreted for a good interpretation, and the other said it should be interpreted for evil. How so? The one who says that it should be interpreted for good claims it is like that story involving the governor of the province of Mishna, who was the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first temple. And he sent a message to his father-in-law, from all those captives that you took when you destroyed the temple and sacked Jerusalem, you have brought for yourself from your wars. In other words, you took many slaves from the Jewish people and brought them back to Babylonia, and yet you have not sent us anyone. Right? You took all these slaves for yourself. You didn't send us any. So Nebuchadnezzar wanted to send him some captives from the Jews to serve his son-in-law. So Palatia, the son of Benaiah, said to Nebuchadnezzar, we who are important shall stand and serve before you here, and our slaves will go there to your son-in-law. In other words, you captured all these Jews, right, when you sacked Jerusalem, and the Jews owned slaves. So keep the Jews as your slaves and take the slaves of the Jews and send them to your son-in-law. So Nebuchadnezzar took his advice. And about him, the prophet Ezekiel said, one who did this good for the Jewish people, meaning Palatia ben Benaiah, who spared them this exile, should he die at half of his days? I guess is what this means, right? That son-in-law, where was the son-in-law? I'm guessing that the son-in-law, the governor of Mishna. So I don't know where Mishna was, but if Palatia was saying that, okay, well, we'll stay with you here, Nebuchadnezzar, and serve you. Now, was he saying that because some Jews were left in Israel? So I don't know if these Jews were left in Israel or the slaves of the Jews, the alleged slaves of the Jews, but somebody didn't get exiled because of what Palatia said to Nebuchadnezzar. So that was a good that he did for the Jewish people, the ones who weren't exiled. I'm having a little trouble following exactly what that means. But at any rate, he arranged, right, by being diplomatic and speaking the right words to Nebuchadnezzar, that at least some Jews were not exiled. Now, the one who said, so that's how the verse could be interpreted for good, that Palatia did a good for the Jewish people. But, right, remember that Rav and Shmuel were disagreeing. Right, so the one who says that no, this verse actually taught something evil about Palatia, what was it? So the one who says that the verse should be interpreted for evil cites the following verse. As it is written, Ezekiel 11:1, then a spirit lifted me up and brought me unto the east gate of the Lord's house, which looked eastward. And behold, at the door of the gate, 25 men. And I saw in the midst of them Jaazaniah, the son of Azur, and Pelatiah, the son of Benaiah, princes of the people. And it is written, and he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. That's Ezekiel 8:16. So the second verse is analyzed in light of the first verse, which states that Pelatiah ben Benaiah was among those 25 people. So, from the fact that it is stated, and their faces were toward the east, don't I know that their backs were toward the west, where the temple was relative to where they were standing? So what is the meaning of the verse when it says their backs toward the temple of the Lord? These words hint at another matter, as the verse teaches that these men exposed themselves from behind and discharged excrement toward the one above, meaning in the direction of the temple. And the prophet Ezekiel is saying, shall he who did this evil in Israel die peacefully on his bed? In other words, what he's saying is, there was a form of idolatry, and believe it or not, you haven't heard this before. So there was a form of idolatry, and perhaps this was one of Nebuchadnezzar's gods that he worshipped, where the way to worship that particular god was to defecate in front of the idol, right? And so now Nebuchadnezzar asked or forced these 25 men to do that practice, which he knew was, for their gods might be good, but for the God of Israel, the gravest insult, and to do that in the direction of the holy temple. And, either to save their lives or to curry favor, these 25 men, including this Pelatiah ben Benaiah, did that practice, right? And so that's what that verse was teaching us. Not that these men are heroes, but rather that they committed a terrible form of idolatry. So the Gemara comments, and it may be concluded that, remember, Rav and Shmuel, one of them said it was good, one said it was evil. We haven't identified which. So it may be concluded that it was Shmuel who said that this verse was actually expressing something evil, as Rabbi Chia bar Avin says that Shmuel says Mushakanai is like the exile with regard to lineage. And even with regard to Mishna, they were not concerned due to slavery nor due to mamzer status. Rather, the priests who were there were not particular with regard to the prohibition against priests marrying divorced women. Consequently, Shmuel maintains that the only flaw of lineage in Mishna was that of chalalim, meaning priests who married divorced women and their children. They're not mamzers, but they're disqualified from serving in the temple. Whereas the opinion that the verse was stated for good maintains that some of the residents of Mishna were slaves. Now, the Gemara rejects this interpretation. Actually, I could say to you that Shmuel said the verse was for good, and there is no contradiction since Shmuel conforms to a standard line of reasoning. As he says, with regard to one who renounces ownership of his slave, the slave is emancipated, and he does not even require a bill of manumission. So somebody who marries this person has not violated any prohibition, right? A Jew cannot marry a slave. A Jew certainly can marry a freed slave. Shmuel cited a proof from that which is stated, but every slave, man that is bought for money. Does this apply only to a slave who is a man and not to a woman slave? Rather, it means the slave of a man, i.e. a slave whose master has authority and control over him is called a slave, since he is the slave of that particular man. But a slave whose master does not have authority over him, such as one who has been declared ownerless or who was abandoned, is not called a slave because he is now a free man. The slaves who went to Mishna no longer had the status of slaves because their masters remained behind. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says this Mishnah, which indicates that only the inhabitants of Babylonia have unflawed lineage, is the statement of Rabbi Meir. But the rabbis, the majority who disagree with Rabbi Meir, say all lands retain a presumptive status of unflawed lineage, right? The sages were very hardcore, but that was not, many sages, let's say, were very hardcore about not wanting their families to marry into these families that were suspected of having flawed lineage. But unless people had a specific reason to suspect a particular family, there was no presumptive status on all the Jews outside of Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. The rabbis disagreed with that. No, we only suspect a family. We have a reason to suspect a family. We have no presumptive status of flawed lineage. Now the Gemara comments, a Maimar permitted Rav Huna bar Nasan to marry a woman from Mechoza, which is outside the borders of Babylonia as pertains to lineage, according to those who held by that view. So Rav Ashi said to Amemar, what is your reasoning in allowing him to do so? Is it because Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says this is the statement of Rabbi Meir, but the rabbis say all lands retain a presumptive status of unflawed lineage? Well, the law follows the opinion of the rabbis, the majority. But the school of Rav Kahana did not teach like this. And the school of Rav Papa did not teach like this. And the school of Rav Zeved did not teach like this. So the Gemara comments, nevertheless, despite hearing all of these reports, Amemar did not accept this law from him because he heard this law directly from Rav Zeved of Neradea, upon whom he relied. The sages taught in Tosefta 5.5, mamzers, and Gibeonites will be pure in the future. This is the statement of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Meir says they will not be pure. Rabbi Yosef said to him, but hasn't it already been stated? Ezekiel 36:25. And I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleanliness. And from all your idols will I cleanse you. We're talking about the Messianic age. Rabbi Meir said to him, when it says from all your uncleanliness and from all your idols, this emphasizes that God will purify people from these types of impurity, but not from mamzer status. Rabbi Yosef said to him, when it says, will I cleanse you, at the end of the verse, you must say, this means even from mamzer status. And the Gemara comments, granted, according to Rabbi Meir, who maintains that mamzers will not be purified when Moshiach comes. This is as it is written, and the mamzers shall dwell in Ashdod, Zechariah 9:6, indicating that there will be mamzers after the Messiah comes, and they will have a special place to live. And the Gemara answers, he understands that verse as Rav Yosef would translate it. The Jewish people shall dwell in tranquility in their land after the Messiah comes, where they were formerly like strangers, right, when they were exiled from that land. And we don't say anything about mamzer. Rather, what you're talking about is mamzer. They will be tranquil from a strange people. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, that mamzers and Gibeonites will be pure in the future. And Rav Yosef said, if it were not for the fact that Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the prophet Elijah would come and remove from us group after group of forbidden people, since he would reveal how many mamzers there are among the Jewish people. Meaning when Elijah comes, there's many matters of Jewish law that we cannot reconcile, we can't understand, we don't know. For example, where are places that dead bodies are buried, that people walked over, and therefore have tuma of the, mace tuma, tuma of the corpse, which when the third temple is built, when the Messiah comes, how are we going to know, who needs to be purified? Where's that red heifer? There's all kinds of stuff that, disputes that we were never able to settle in Jewish history, where Elijah will come and reveal all. Right? Elijah is the one who's going to be tasked by God that all information that Jews need to have and couldn't have in regular history, but will have in the Messianic age, it's Elijah who's going to reveal it. So one of the things that Elijah could do is tell us, which families really have unflawed status and which ones have flawed status. But he won't need to do that, according to this view, because in terms of mamzers, all the mamzers are going to be purified. They won't be mamzers anymore. So does that mean that during the Messianic age, there will be no more mamzers? In other words, what if after the Messiah comes, a brother and sister commit incest and have a baby? That child is a mamzer. Are you saying that after the Messiah comes, if such an event were tragically to happen, that the child won't be a mamzer because he'll be automatically purified of the mamzer status? No. What they're saying is it'll be retroactive to the ones who didn't know and weren't sure, and it happened way back deep in history. That they'll be purified of. But people who violate laws, even in the Messianic age, they'll have consequences for that. The sages taught a convert may marry a mamzeret, right, a female mamzer, ab initio. This is the statement of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yehuda says a convert may not marry a mamzeret. A convert, an emancipated slave, and a halal are permitted to marry the daughter of a priest. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason of Rabbi Yosef, who deems it permitted for a convert to marry a female mamzer? And the Gemara answers, 5 congregations are written, meaning the word congregation appears 5 times in the Torah with regard to various people of flawed lineage who are prohibited from entering the congregation of God. One is referring to priests, to teach that people with flawed lineage may not enter their congregation. And another use of the word is referring to Levites, meaning that they cannot marry these people of flawed lineage. And the third one is to Israelites. And a fourth one is to permit a mamzer to marry a shituki, right? One who does not know his father is. Since a mamzer is prohibited from entering only the congregation of God, but he may marry someone who is not definitely a member of the congregation, for example, a shituki. And one serves to permit a shituki to marry an Israelite, as only one who is a definite mamzer may not marry an Israelite. As for the congregation of converts, it is not called a congregation. That word doesn't apply to them. And they may marry those prohibited from entering the congregation of Israel. This is a great blessing to mamzers, right? That actually is the law. A mamzer may not marry someone who was born a Jew, but may marry someone who converts to Judaism. It's interesting because one who converts is a full-fledged Jew in every way, and it is prohibited to remind a convert that they were not born Jewish. But under halacha, that distinction exists, that a mamzer can marry a convert. I think when we saw that earlier, the problem, the convert can marry the mamzer, but the child of that union will still be a mamzer. So it's problematic. It's not maybe it's not something that the convert wants to do, even though it's permitted. Where are we? Now, and if you wish, say this. So too, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Yosef that Levites and priests are 2 congregations, since there are special laws of marriage that apply only to priests. So rather, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the permissibility of the marriage of a mamzer with a shituki, right, one who doesn't know who his father is, and a shituki with an Israelite is derived from one instance of the word congregation, from the verse, a mamzer shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. That's a source for what we're talking about, Deuteronomy 23:3. Now, this is accomplished by inferring the following. It is one who is a definite mamzer who may not enter, but one who is a mamzer as a result of uncertainty, the shituki, since he doesn't know who his father is, may enter the congregation. And similarly, it is into the congregation of those with definite unflawed lineage that a mamzer may not enter, but into a congregation of those with uncertain lineage, like a shituki, he may enter. And this verse therefore teaches that both types of marriages are permitted. In any event, Rabbi Yehuda maintains with one instance of the word congregation to interpret, from which he derives that it is also prohibited. He maintains that it is prohibited for a convert to marry a mamzeret, a female mamzer, just like any other Jew. But that's not the law. And if you wish, say, these two, one who is a definite mamzer and one who is a mamzer as a result of uncertainty, are 2 congregations, each requiring their own verse. And the reason of Rabbi Yehuda is from a different place. Numbers 15:15, as for the congregation, there shall be one statute both for you and for the stranger that sojourns with you, which indicates that converts are considered like Israelites with regard to their being included in the category of congregation. And according to Rabbi Yosef, who holds that a convert may marry a mamzer, the phrase one statute interrupts the matter, and converts are not considered part of the congregation of God in this context. And that's where we're going to leave off. I should have said we're almost done. Let me check for some comments and questions. I need to sign in to the Google Doc. That happens sometimes. Okay, Bill. It would sound that the Ishmaelites that Rebbe and Levi are discussing are, more or less, a group that historians called the Nabateans today. They built Petra in modern Jordan as a trading city. I will say that they themselves would probably not have taken kindly to being called bandits, but the commerce was definitely the heart of their everything, really. And for better or worse, around the world, when people rely on trade for their livelihoods, if the trade is bad in a season, all their same tools and skills do make raiding a very effective means of getting through the lean times. Very interesting. Thank you, Bill. It's so good to have a historian in the class. Jonathan, although I completely get the desire to follow the laws of the Torah, which is what we're studying, and driving to the detail of who is a mamzer and a zona, etc., so that the priest can marry only a subset of people as specified in Torah, is worthy to understand. Just like sacrifices, to the modern ear, this is difficult to hear. I have a really hard time with a person born with a stigma that isn't of their own doing. I agree. What a sad thing, right? The child of this adultery or the child of incest, child didn't ask for that, right? I can't explain it. I can't explain it. I think that falls into one of those categories of laws that I can't understand, right? There are many laws that we don't understand. It's because God said so. Bill, I thought when we covered it before, it was maintained that the child of a convert and a mamzer follows the status of the convert, not the mamzer. Oh, maybe I remembered that wrong. Thank you. And that this was seen as a mercy from God, a way of removing the status of the mamzerim from a lineage. I guess there was a disagreement about that, and maybe I got it wrong and you remembered it right. I'm going to look it up after class. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.